Breaking news right now on ABC News Live. A jury has reached a partial verdict in the sex trafficking and racketeering trial of Sean Diddy Combs. A note sent to the judge saying that the jury is unable to reach a verdict on the racketeering conspiracy count, adding that there are, quote, unpersuadable opinions. Both prosecutors and the defense agreeing with the judge's plans to instruct the jury to continue deliberations, and the next steps are apparently being debated right now. So for more on this, I want to get to Rena Roy, who is outside the courthouse, along with legal analyst Brian Buckmeyer for more. And Rena, I want to start with you. Just kind of get us caught up on where things are right now. I'm sorry, it sounds like Rena's still getting connected there. I want to go to trial attorney Brian Buckmeyer. And Brian, break this down for me. We heard about all these notes that were being passed from the jury to the judge. By my calculations, it's roughly about 6. And then we have this partial verdict. What does that tell you?
Yeah, so we've seen notes, as you said, and I think you cut out there for a second. I think it's 6 notes. I would agree with you there. The first note talking about one of the jurors not being able to follow the rules, but past that, we've seen pretty standard questions asking about drug distribution, asking to see testimony of Cassie as well as David Phillips, one of the escorts, in various parts of this case, parts that the government told the jurors to focus on. And now we have this note saying there's a partial verdict, saying that they have an unpersuadable opinion between them when it comes to that first count of racketeering conspiracy, but they have a verdict as it applies to the other 4 counts. Just as a reminder, that is 2 counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, where Sean Combs faces 15 years to life for each one of those, and then transportation to engage in prostitution. And there's an either or for those 2 charges, where you could be talking about transporting either Jane or Cassie or any of the 25 plus male escorts that were allegedly brought across state lines. Each one of those counts carry up to 10 years in prison.
Well, and Brian, I mean, as a criminal defense attorney, this is day 2 of deliberations, and you get a verdict. We certainly expected one before the July 4th holiday, but I'm curious, if you were Diddy's defense team right now, how are you feeling?
A little happy. I mean, beating the top count is great, but the issue here is that with the sex trafficking charges, they have just as much of a penalty as it does with that RICO conspiracy, the potential of life in prison. I'm a little worried, I think, especially of that Cassie charge. If he goes down on the charge against Cassie, that is a lot of time for a 54-year-old to be spending in prison, a minimum of 15 years potentially of life. But I think you're also optimistic and hopeful that verdict doesn't necessarily mean conviction. Verdict simply means they've come to a decision. With the RICO conspiracy, right now they're trying to figure out, do we simply stop them and kind of cut our losses and just keep that as a mistrial or a hung jury as to that count? Or do we give what's called an Allen charge, where the judge will instruct them to continue deliberating? Or, looking at the time, it's 4:47, to say, Judge, you know what? Maybe let them sleep on it. Maybe let them come back. Maybe they'll change their mind about some of the verdicts in a positive way for either side, defense or the government. But at that point, you're really just rolling the dice and just hoping for the best.
In that case, Brian, in your expertise, I mean, would we actually hear what the partial verdict is before that RICO charge is essentially determined?
Yeah, so there is a possibility that you would hear a polling of the jury where either side, typically the prosecutor or the government, will ask to poll the jury to say, is this your true and final verdict, or some language along that sense. And they'll do it for all of the counts. They'll do it to make sure that if Sean Combs is convicted of any of the charges, that all 12 of them agree to that. Or if he's found not guilty of a charge, that all 12 of them have that as well. And it's likely that they will also do that for that RICO conspiracy. And you'll hear something along the lines of 10-2 to convict, or 6-6, or whatever the number may be. But I think that one side or the other will likely poll the jury to see what the numbers are.
And obviously, this is something that is developing right now. We just got a new note from our chief investigative correspondent, Eric Matursky, who's there inside that court. He said the judge will not take a partial verdict. He says that once the lawyers work out the language, the judge will call the jurors into the courtroom and instruct them to keep deliberating. Both sides asked the judge to do this. The judge agreed. No verdict is being read as of now, and again, this is going to continue to develop, so bear with us here. But Brian, you kind of ran down the 5 counts that Diddy faces right now, and so looking at the 6 weeks of testimony that we had here. The prosecution really trying to really kind of swing for the fences with this RICO count. Why do you feel like there's been a little bit of a holdup specifically on that particular charge?
So there are 2 parts of the RICO conspiracy that have to be considered. One, do you believe this to be a criminal enterprise? And at first, I thought that might have been a foregone conclusion. And the reason why I say that is because they've gone to the second aspect of evaluating the predicate acts. And when they asked for that definition of drug distribution, that to me made me think that everyone thought that this was a RICO conspiracy and they were moving on. But now hearing this note that they're hung, I have to imagine, and I could be wrong, I've been wrong in the past and I'll be wrong in the future, but I have to imagine it's the question of whether or not it's a RICO conspiracy. Because there are so many, I think there are about 8 to 10 predicate acts, that so long as they're unanimous in their belief that one of these predicate acts happened and they get 2 of them, that's halfway to RICO. There are so many of them, the arson, the sex trafficking, the prostitution, the transportation to engage in prostitution, the bribery, the obstruction of government. I would imagine that 2 could be found amongst this 12, but the linchpin, the centerpiece of whether or not there's a racketeering conspiracy or this is just a business that Sean Combs operates, I would think that would be the sticking point that some people are just going to say, you know what, I don't believe it. And they're really digging in their heels.
Well, and again, just to refresh our viewers, prosecutors allege that Combs was the ringleader of an alleged enterprise that abused, threatened, and coerced women into prolonged drug-fueled sexual orgies with male prostitutes, which he called freak-offs, and then essentially threatened them into silence. There were 6 weeks of testimony. Federal prosecutors called 34 witnesses to the stand, attempting to prove their case. Combs' former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, was the star witness during this trial. She testified that Combs subjected her to a decade of abuse and that the threats and sexual demands from Combs drove her into addiction, exposed her to regular spates of violence, and ultimately led her to contemplate suicide. And Brian, reflecting specifically on Cassie's testimony, I mean, how powerful was that for the prosecution in proving at least some of their case here?
So I would say when it comes to cases of sex trafficking or sexual abuse, especially decades in the past, it oftentimes is a he said, she said. But the government had a key piece of evidence, that being the video of the Intercontinental Hotel. And it was a big part of this case, both when Cassie took the stand, as well as clearly during the closing argument, and clearly from that note asking about the testimony surrounding that very incident. And so they had something to show for the force, the brutality, the violence that was exerted upon Cassie, and even some of the photos of the aftermath, the black eyes, the bruises to her body, the witnesses like her mother or friends or other associates who came on and testified about the brutality of Sean Combs. And I think that really helped in carrying the day of asking whether or not Cassie was a victim of sex trafficking, especially by force or threat of force. Put aside the coercion or the fraud. I think for Cassie, the conversation in large part is about force and being able to see it, being able to hear it, being able to see Cassie as she describes it, sitting on the stand. I think that was powerful for the jury in making their decision about the sex trafficking. Now, do I believe and assume that that might not work out well for Combs in terms of the verdict? Yes, but we still don't know what their verdict is. It appears that by the number of counts they've decided on the sex trafficking, it's just which way they go will be interesting. I will say this one added point, though. It's interesting to go back and ask them to decide on the racketeering conspiracy, because if Sean Combs is found guilty of racketeering conspiracy, there is this portion of the indictment that talks about forfeiture, that Sean Combs would have to forfeit any proceeds of the racketeering conspiracy, any money that was used to facilitate it. And so if they're hung on the RICO, it could save Sean Combs his empire or his enterprise, at least his legal one, in terms of the money that he would lose from it. Don't forget, he has about 60 civil lawsuits still around the corner when this ends. So I think trying to get a definitive answer as to that racketeering conspiracy could be helpful or very harmful to him based on not just his liberty, but also the money associated with him.
That's very interesting. And one more note just on the timing of this all. We're hearing from the court that it's not yet clear if jurors will continue deliberating tonight or if they will opt to go home for the day. But I want to get to Rena Roy, who is outside the courthouse right now. And Rena, I imagine that for the crowds of media and onlookers that have gathered day in and day out for this trial, there's been a reaction there. What's it like there right now?
Yeah, well, Alex, you can probably see behind me across the street there that crowds have started to gather. A substantial number of people have started to show up. They've been cheering, making all kinds of noise. Combs' family actually just went inside the courthouse in the black vans that they have been using really every single day of this trial here. As we know, this partial verdict came down more than 12 hours into deliberations here. And inside the courtroom, we are told from our teams who are inside there that the body language was really just striking, that it was very quiet. Federal prosecutors were not saying much to each other. Combs looked to be very emotional. He seemed to have tears in his eyes that he was wiping away. Now, as we know, they reached this partial verdict, so the judge is going to be instructing them, it seems, to go back into the deliberation room, Alex.
Rena, thank you for that. It was a little hard to hear. I think we're gonna work on the audio situation there. But I want to go back to Brian on this and Rena's point about Combs' body language in there. And listen, I imagine if you have a client that you're defending and there's a verdict that's rendered which will one way or another reshape the rest of their life, it can be emotional. But we're hearing at one point he appeared to wipe his eyes. He was the defense attorneys were standing there in a huddle around him. Take us through. I mean, what's playing out if you're on that side of the courtroom in that moment?
So I've been in this position many times where you have a note from the jury and you're making that decision of what do we do? You're getting everyone together and everyone's giving their 2 cents and you're having this conversation of walking through the idea with your client there so they can absorb everything. Sean Combs is what we would call maybe like an intelligent or a complex client. There's someone who is very sophisticated and intelligent, and you can speak to them as if they were an attorney as well. I don't assume that he's not going to be able to understand the strategy that attorneys are going to be breaking down in front of him, and you just kind of put everything on the table, and you have everyone's experience there. You have a lot of attorneys here with experience. You have Alexandra Shapiro, who's a very experienced appellate attorney, who's probably going to give her 2 cents of, okay, if this moves in this direction or this moves in that direction, this is how we can appeal, this is how we can argue. Maybe we do this, maybe we don't do this. You have people like Brian Steele and Xavier Donaldson, who are very tried and tested trial attorneys, trying to figure out what we do next, and Sean Combs will take that information and then decide how to move forward.
All right, Brian. Thank you, Rena.